Hello everyone, I'm Cameron Jackson and I'm here with
Zion Stevens.
And this is Municipal Matters, where we at the Missouri State Political Science Department connect with local leaders to learn about their vision for this great city we call home. Along the way, we will also learn about their personal story and why they decided to be involved in the community.
Today we are joined by Amy Blansit, founder and CEO of the Drew Lewis Foundation, located in Grant Beach neighborhood, nestled in North Springfield. This organization seeks to foster healthy and sustainable communities. The Cornerstone program offered by Drew Lewis Foundation, known as RISE, is dedicated to fostering sustainable development initiatives that have a lasting impact on financial outcomes of local communities.
Say that whole thing again.
Okay. Today we are joined by Amy Blansit, founder and CEO of the Drew Lewis Foundation, located in the Grant Beach neighborhood, nestled in North Springfield. This organization seeks to foster healthy and sustainable communities. The Cornerstone program offered by the Drew Lewis Foundation, known as RISE, is dedicated to fostering sustainable development initiatives that have a positive impact on the financial outcomes of local communities throughout Springfield and the state of Missouri. Amy, it's great to have you on the show. I can't tell you how excited I am to talk about all the things Drew Lewis has accomplished.
Awesome. Thanks for inviting me today.
So the first thing I want to talk about is your background, your upbringing, education, all the early things that make you who you are.
Is this a multi-series podcast? Because I got something to say. Just
okay, yeah.
If you're asking about how I got here, right? We're talking
Right.
about 45 years of making what happened.
Right.
But no. So really, the idea of how I grew up. I grew up in Branson, in actually the middle of nowhere between Ozark and Branson, and I grew up with very innovative parents. But we also grew up low income. I have 7 siblings. My parents were foster parents. And so when you talk about the idea of understanding the social needs of our community, I was born and raised by people who deeply were connected with and cared for the social needs in our community. And that obviously had lasting effect on me and my siblings. And so a lot of times when people ask, why do you do what you do? Like, if you knew my parents, I think you would say, how do you not do what I do? So it really was a part of who I am and how I was raised. And then I went to Drury, and I just said I grew up in low income, so going to Drury is kind of
Right.
the opposite of. But I knew that education was important. My mom went back to school in her 40s, and I was 5 years old when she started, and I went to the Times School of the Ozarks, College of the Ozarks now. Hard work, and she did. She had my brother, who was her 7th child. She packed the 2 of us up and, committed to going back to school because she wanted to be contributing to the family, but she also wanted to have the independence that education and employment bring. And so, education was really important to me as well. So I focused on that, and I was able to get an academic scholarship to Drury University, and I was very proud of that, coming from a low-income family. And then that introduced me to the north side of Springfield. I went down the avenue of pre-med, exercise physiology, and ended up with my doctorate in health sciences. Along the way, I've been faculty at Missouri State. I was for 15 years and loved teaching here. But eventually, about a year ago, I had to make a hard decision to leave the university because the Drew Lewis Foundation has grown to the point where it needed me as a full-time, focusing on
Right.
that. And so that was really in honor of my husband, Drew, who had passed, and his dream of what real estate means to Springfield, and really combining that idea of social awareness, housing, and then what Grant Beach, one of our lowest income communities, needed. I bought a house in that neighborhood, and over the last 17 years I've been involved in what that neighborhood looks like, what North Side Springfield looks like, and using my health science background, my connections with the university, to really bring together community collaboration, not only in Grant Beach, but as you mentioned, we spread throughout many counties in Missouri and even in Colorado. So that's 45 years
that's
summed
pretty
up in
good
4
stuff.
minutes.
No, that's awesome. So I did want to talk a little bit about your interest in health. So what kind of sparked that? I feel like it takes a certain type of person to go into the health sciences.
Yeah.
So what was your interest in that, and then how does that shift into more public, community involvement, community health. I just was curious of that pathway.
So we grew up on a farm.
Right.
My parents were both in the Kansas City, Kansas area, city kids, and they uprooted our family before I was born, and they moved 6 kids to the Ozarks, and they bought my great-grandparents 40 acres. And all of a sudden, they started, my mom milked cows before, going to her college classes.
Wow.
My dad built fences, and so I grew up, if I wanted to have any fun, or if I wanted to earn money, working in the garden. And so I've always had a connection of where and how food grows, where it comes from. And that obviously played a big role. I also love sports, and I had parents who spent hours and hours of sitting in gyms and supporting those the things that I loved. And so when I really looked at what I wanted to do when I grew up, first I actually was in the pre-med scholars program with SLU, and as I began to look at that, the medical field was changing to where it was more physician owned and ran, and they were all being bought up, and it was becoming a big conglomerate ran by the hospital, controlled by the hospital, and it was how many people can you see, how much money can you generate. And the mentors that I had in medicine were unhappy, becoming disengaged with that model, and realized what was going to happen. And so I just had this kind of negative influence, but thankfully on them being aware of what was happening, what I really wanted to do, and realizing that maybe medicine wasn't the right route for that. And so I started looking at other options and fell in love with the idea of health sciences, especially studying global health and different practices that are really creating quality of life for individuals. And so the social determinants of health. I'm sure my students who are out there are like, oh Lord, she's talking about that again. But they really matter. And health is even down to the root of education. We know that individuals that are more educated have better health outcomes. We know that countries that focus on early health, maternal health, fetal health, have better adult health, which has better social economic stability and outcomes. And so I really got fascinated by the idea that health can run our economy. When we really look at, do we have a healthy working class? And we don't. We're very broken. We are the sickest nation of all developed countries, and that really can affect our GDP. And so combining math and social issues and health outcomes, I really became fascinated with that. And then you bring it home to Springfield. Missouri has some of the greatest number of individuals that fall into the gap of uninsured, and that has a massive social economic impact on our state, individuals that aren't seeking care. And then it's also personal. So my husband was in real estate, and they're self-insured, and when the market crashed, it was keep your mortgage paid, and you have no money coming in, and what are you going to give up? And for him, it was cashing in 401k, it was going to only emergency medical, and giving up those things in order to make sure he kept the home for him and the kids. And so then to have a diagnosis of cancer and be only having major medical insurance, we had an uphill battle. And if I didn't have a background in health sciences and wasn't the very aggressive advocate, it would have been a $500,000 debt that he would have been responsible for, and it would have been absolute ruin for me and the kids after his death. And so it's very personal, but it's more than that. It's our entire community, it's our entire state, it's our country. So it's
right. No,
it's a pretty expansive issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think it's
that's.
Go ahead.
I think that's very interesting. You have a lot of really multifaceted interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely wanted to highlight the fact that, so I don't know if a lot of people know, but you have a lot of interest in Spain. And I think recently it was the WHO, I think, that mentioned or that stated that Spain is actually now the healthiest
Correct.
country
Spain
in the
has
world.
outpaced Japan and is now considered the healthiest. They have the most centennials. They have the Mediterranean diet. They, are not in a 40, 60-hour work week. Socialization is so important there. Villages to cities are built around plazas, and making sure that you have time, multi-generational living. One of my favorite things about Spain is walking a street and having the grandparent pushing the stroller while the parents are at work, and then the grandparents picking the kids up from school. Or you see so many dads picking up kids from school, waiting outside, socializing. And in the U.S., we don't have as many dads visually, right, that you can see so engaged with the kids. So it's an entire family dynamic and network, multi-generational. And then they're happier. They drink amazing wine, and might also be one of my favorite things about it. But so I took a group of students 2 years ago, and the students had to write essays on each of the social determinants of health. And they got to go and live and experience and see what that looked like, and then give comparisons of what are those statistics and how do those have an effect on the life and health of individuals living in Spain versus here in the U.S. So, it's one of those where I went when I was 17, 18 years ago, and I experienced what I feel like every day we have to fight for here in the U.S. to have just to be happy and healthy. I went there and was like, wait a second, this like to my core is what I'm looking for in life. And I wrote on this little green card this bucket list of things I wanted to do, and one of them was to move and experience a life in Spain. And then I met Drew, and I after Drew passed, I became a single mom, and a decade later to be able to revisit that goal and make it a reality has been amazing, and to live that and to not have to fight for health and happiness, it's amazing, and I wish everyone could experience that.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a good springboard to ask you a little bit more about the Drew Lewis Foundation. What can you tell us about the mission and maybe a little bit about its founding and how you decided where specifically to tailor its interests?
Sure, that's comes all about the idea that I bought a building with the intent of saving a building, and instead it really became a part of the story of what Springfield was looking at in how do we save an entire community, how do we begin to have conversation. So part of it is right place at the right time. I bought a house in 2007 in Grant Beach, and that's the same year that the school closed. So even though Grant Beach at the time might have not been the best neighborhood as far as the statistics, it is historically one of the most beautiful, neighborhoods that we have in Springfield. So I fell in love with the trees and the buildings. And then the school closed, and very quickly that street had constant police and fire presence. We were calling regularly, kids were on the roof, there was a fire, there was prostitution, there was drugs, everything was happening. And over the 6 years, that building just became worse and worse, and the houses around it became worse and worse. So you talk about broken window, theory. It was happening there, and so anyway, I wanted to save that building. That's 100 years built by hand. Just the history that was there, and so once Drew and I purchased the building, he actually ended up passing only a couple months later. And then it became really this amazing group of individuals that came forward to help save this building with me. And the sense of community was so amazing. But then we also had neighbors and people who lived there who really started to get involved. We started doing kind of a weekly potluck. And as we began to hear more and more about the needs of housing, banking relationships, quality childcare, it just began to actually evolve itself. And so then Missouri State had lots of my coworkers here that were getting involved, and a lot of other community nonprofits. And so it really snowballed. It began as an idea, and all the right people came to the table. We never had to advertise. We never had to fight to make it happen. And then, naming it and honoring it for Drew was an easy idea for me, of course, in order to keep his idea and belief about the importance of real estate, the importance of community.
Sure.
He did not know a stranger. And so what we do now is we focus on working with individuals. Before it was specific families. We've now expanded to, all ages, individuals who are living paycheck to paycheck. Doesn't necessarily have to be poverty, but it's individuals who are struggling, and one missed paycheck can create an entire downfall. And so we do education that allows for personal, professional, and financial empowerment. We partner also with banks and other nonprofits in order to bring the resources that individuals need into the Fairbanks and to create kind of a hub of those resources. We also partner with many other nonprofits. The Gardens, Springfield Community Gardens, produces food. That food connected with Ozark Food Harvest and a project of CPO. We have food distribution that's fresh produce versus canned. And so again, that health aspect comes into it. We also focus on housing. We have the Blue House Project. We've purchased over 23 properties in Grant Beach in order to renovate and create opportunities for home ownership. And then we have the Nonprofit Career Academy, and that helps educate individuals who work for nonprofits now or interested in working for nonprofits, who want to better understand how nonprofits operate to be strategically, a better employee for that organization. So overall, we really kind of have this tag where we work on engaging individuals, providing the support and resources so that we can help transform not only our, the blocks around the Fairbanks, but really the lives of everyone that we touch.
Sure. And shameless plug, but I would tell everybody listening to make sure to attend community dinner every Thursday night at the Drew Lewis Foundation, located in the Fairbanks.
Yes, 1126 North Broadway. And that started again with me ordering Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut was down the block.
Nice.
And I met the owners of that, and they gave me amazing deals, and I just bought pizza every week. People came and scrape paint and help renovate, and then it turned into a potluck. And 10 years later, here we are still doing every Thursday night. Even through COVID, we had food distribution every Thursday. And so we've really not skipped a beat for 10 years of just creating community around food.
That's awesome. And moving on from there, I did want to touch on, for our listeners who may not know, you did run for office.
I did.
And I just kind of wanted to ask you, how was your experience with that? What worked? What didn't? What did you learn from that for our viewers?
Yeah. So the reason I ran, I get asked that often, was first, there was a city council seat that opened, and I lived in Zone 1, and that was a seat that was open. And that was my intent in the beginning. And as soon as I opened that idea that I would run for office, there were a lot of other opportunities that were presented. I didn't end up running for city council because we have a number of contracts Drew Lewis Foundation does with the city through CDBG funds, community development block grants, and we were going to have to give those up. So it wasn't the best financial decision for the nonprofit. And then the 133rd, so it was a redistricting year, and it was possible that I was going to live in the 133rd or the 132nd, and the line changed, every week. And so as the 133rd was open, I decided to run for that. And the reason I decided to run was that, one, we do not have a very functioning government right now because of a supermajority, and then the discourse that's happening within that supermajority. So I tell people, even if there was a Democrat supermajority and we had as much or as lack of government function as we do now, I would have run as a Republican. For me, it's not necessarily about the specifics of the party. It's about doing what's right, and it's about creating communication and working across the lines in order to create healthy government. The other thing that we've obviously seen in our state was a lot of things stripped away when we look at those social determinants of health. Cuts to education, cuts to health, no expansion of Medicaid. And so for the information that I know, that we see not only in our own country, but globally, of what creates a healthy market of workers, what creates a happy, functioning society, we have cut that, we have gutted it, and we have created a lot of turmoil in our state that affects our potential as a state. So my health background and the work that I do at the Drew Lewis Foundation greatly played, because I realized if I can go upstream and help shape policy, I don't have to work so hard fighting against bad policy, right? And so there was that opportunity, and I'm still heavily involved. We're still in Jefferson City regularly. We're still, those relationships that I developed during that time are still extremely valuable. And so, listeners, you don't have to run for office in order to be engaged. If anyone's interested in going to Jeff City, I will go up there with you. You can learn the ropes of how easy it is to set those appointments and to go and talk with legislators to learn more about what's going on, and to follow all of the resources that are available for you to, even from remote, see what's happening, what are our legislators doing, communicate with your legislators. Those emails, and for them to see what their constituents want, are really important. So it was an amazing experience. You asked what worked, what didn't, but I'm getting long-winded.
I think it's a really interesting perspective to have, especially in this sort of, people think along their party lines, to think that you would run as the Republican Party, as somebody who may historically have been a Democrat, to kind of get the things you want done. I think that's a really interesting perspective to have.
And you mentioned that you're a Democrat, you're a Republican. I'm a human being, and I'm a human being who cares about other human beings and building the resources necessary for anyone who wants to and is willing to move forward. I live in the idea of abundance and not the how can I take as much for myself in order to create the best for me, and I'm trying to say a airworthy word, and I'm not caring about anyone else. And so, it is, again, I believe in government, and when government isn't working, that's when we have to look at, does the party matter? And if the party isn't functioning properly, then sometimes we have to get new people in that party in order to get back to the middle. So I think there's so many people who say, I'm not red and I'm not blue. I am purple. Yeah. And as someone who wants to realize that there are benefits to both parties, but they have to collaborate in order for there to be balance. And that's what I was willing to do. And so, I think more people should disengage with what it means to be Democrat or Republican, because they are not what they used to be, and now they're so far right and left that we've got to have people that are willing to come back to the middle and say, I don't align with the party, I align with these beliefs. And when the party no longer aligns with those beliefs, I'm willing to run on what ticket is going to align with my beliefs.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message. Circling back to what you mentioned earlier about community, I think in the post-COVID digital era, a lot of people are worried about this increasing sense of isolation. I think especially for younger people, which our podcast is kind of tailored towards, one of the interests is how do you build a community? How do you go out into a community and not only make it better, but maybe you have to start it from the ground up. I know a lot of people who don't know their neighbors. I certainly don't. When I was growing up, I barely did, and I lived in a rural suburban neighborhood. So I think that's a growing concern. How would you recommend people, young, old, approach something like that?
Sure. So I have a perfect example of just even the way that we build our cities. So we go back to Spain. Everyone is out. They sit on their, even if they don't have front porches necessarily, they sit in their front stoop and they talk to each other as they're going by. They create plazas to where multiple restaurants are inward facing and everyone's engaging. Drew Lewis Foundation is getting ready to build a pocket neighborhood to where if you won't be able to not know your neighbor because your neighbor's going to be 8 feet away from you. Yeah. We're going to be building intentional front porches that are 20 feet away from each other, facing in. We're creating patios that allow for, if you're barbecuing, there's room for everyone to bring up chairs. So even Springfield, we don't have code that, unless it's an apartment complex, we don't have code that says, let's take down those walls, let's build more front porches, and let's reconnect. And so this neighborhood is on 1.2 acres, it's in Grant Beach, it's on Broadway, and we're going to be building houses that are close and that actually build the idea of, I want to connect with people, let's take our bikes and go ride the trail. I don't want to spend Saturday mowing and isolated with my privacy fence from the people who live next to me. My neighbor has lived in his house for several decades. He's never known the people who have lived in the home that I'm in now. And at first when I was like, hey, you want to share trash because I have one bag a week and you have a disability and I'll take the trash to the curb for us, He's like, who are you and why are you bothering me? Like, what do you want, lady?
Who's this stranger?
Right. And I was persistent, and it was like, hey, I'm going to be working in my backyard. I see, you have some stuff. Can I help you with this? And the Drew Lewis Foundation has staff who can do these things for you. You need some paint done. Do you want these resources? And now he watches my house when I'm gone, and I watch his. I notice when his car isn't there, and I send him a message, hey, are you okay? And for him, it's the first time to have a neighbor, and he's loving it. We bring him food each week. And so partly it just takes interjecting yourself into someone else's life, which was my least favorite thing, I will say, about politics, of going door to door. Some people love that. And if you love that, you should run for office, because that is what it takes to win every day, 100 doors. Because for me, it's like, oh, this is your private place, and
Exactly.
I'm interrupting your dinner, I'm interrupting your life. But that is what we should be doing.
Yeah.
That is what we should, is like, hey, neighbor, I noticed this thing. Neighborhood watch programs, that is simply all they're about. If you go through this education, and it's simply like, hey, care about each other, and call the police when you see something, know your neighbor, get their phone number, call them when you see something. So part of it's just kind of re-educating and beginning to build structurally what it takes to force us to get back to that, so that it's not, the headphones and microphones talking to each other through
Right.
gaming, but actually creating that environment that allows for it. Part of it is we just have to build it, because if we don't build it, we're going to stay isolated. And so it takes individuals who are saying, this isn't healthy. How do we create something that that forces us to have community?
Sure. Kind of off topic from our scripts, one of the things that I'm curious about is you talk about working in the Grant Park area, if I heard you right.
Grant Beach neighborhood.
Grant Beach
yeah.
neighborhood. And in working in those, historically low income neighborhoods, one of the concerns that people generally have is gentrification and pushing
Yes.
the older residents out.
Yeah.
How much thought do you have to give to that, and how
Absolutely.
much does it shape the choices that you make?
That's a great question. So first, in Grant Beach, there's 1,700 homes, and we've affected 20. So our 20 is less than 1%, and what the work that we're doing is slow and intentional. So we only work on about 6 houses a year, because we don't want to come in, buy a bunch of houses, renovate them, and become landlords.
Yeah.
This neighborhood has about 43, we're ticking up to maybe 46% home ownership, and we know that neighborhoods that are below that 50%, which we're seeing this generation not so interested in buying homes because they've seen a lot of trauma and crisis in their parents through 2 major events in their lifetime. But again, it's affecting at a slow rate. The other thing that we do is when we renovate a house, we do not list it on the market, because one, we do not sell it at market rate. So right now market rate is extremely inflated. So
Yeah.
if we renovate a house and we put it on the market, it might be a $200,000 house. If we list that basically takes all houses in that market and begins to raise the cost for someone else to buy a house. We also don't list because we sell our houses back to individuals below market. And so we don't want to then do the opposite of drop market pricing. Now here's the thing about gentrification. Every year, for individuals who own a home, you pray for gentrification in the sense that your home should increase in value at the same rate of what our rates are increasing. So if we have a flat market so that we say no one in this neighborhood can afford for the value of their house to go up because their taxes are going to go up, that means the asset that they have in that home is stagnant, and they are missing out on the opportunity that when they go to sell it or pass it on to their family, that the value that that house should have slowly and naturally increased has not increased. So what we're working on doing is taking houses, the houses we buy are houses that have holes in the floors, they've had fires in them, they have been slumlords, favorite home because they've invested $0
Yeah.
in decades, and they have collected massive amount of income on a home that no one should be living in those conditions. And so we take those homes, and we are taking a 100-year-old home, we are investing in it so that it can become another 100 years of restored historical home. So it's two-part. One, we do the best that we can to not falsely inflate or drop the market by selling most of them through our own network and resources. But two, we're also educated and working on, just like every other neighborhood, all of us who own homes want to see a 2 to 4% increase in the value of our home. That comes back to policy when we look at older adults who their income, if they're receiving Social Security and we're seeing that rates have increased by 2 to 4%, well, their income should also increase by that amount. Or we should look at savings, or they could decrease the owner's property taxes. There are a lot of things that can be done that allow that asset to build, but don't require 55, or, I always say 55 and above. As I'm nearing that, I'm like, let's talk about what happens when you're 75, right? But there are things that we can do that begin to allow individuals to live and age in place. A lot of that comes back to policy and things that, even at the city level, we could make choices that help us build strong neighborhoods that allow people to, live their life in the house that they've been in decades versus having to move and downsize.
Okay, that's awesome. And so when you look at Springfield, 5 to 10 years from now, is there something specific you'd like to see done? Maybe better public transportation, free public transportation, or, better housing? Obviously, we have a housing crisis in Springfield. Where do your passions lie specifically with the city? And where would you like to see improvement? Where do you see the city in 5 to 10 years?
What I'm excited to see is the amount of time that the city has taken to create this forward SGF. What does 2040 look like? And I'm on the neighborhoods committee, and what we're really looking at is current code. A lot of the things we're talking about today, current code perpetuates those problems. And they've done an amazing job to listen to the community, to open it up, to bring in some really great advisors and evaluators on what we can do in our community. So first, you mentioned housing. We have an old housing stock, and we need investment in that. The city's working on programs. I'm on the board of Restore SGF. We have Better Block Springfield. I'm on the board of that. And CPO has a housing commission. We're really looking at how do we improve housing so that we're building or renovating in the mindset of what do new homeowners that are entering the market want, and how do we build code that does increase density. I keep saying this, but I don't want to spend all day Saturday mowing my yard. I mean,
Right.
I love playing in my garden and whatever, that's fine. But I don't want a half-acre yard. I had that. It was fine. Lawnmower and a beer on Saturday. I've done it. And I now love my little 900 square foot home with a small backyard. And so really, it's looking at how housing. You mentioned transportation. We are a sprawling city. We have better transportation than most cities our size. If you're hearing this and you ride the bus, I know you're like, this woman's never been on the bus. She has no idea what she's talking about. But because the bus system has to reach everywhere in Springfield, it is a very difficult thing to solve, and it becomes a very expensive thing. Again, it comes back to policy. We receive some of the lowest amount of transportation funds in order to provide free or even better or more transportation resources in our city. And so busing isn't the only answer. The only reason I need a bus is because to live, I've got to go clear across Springfield to access resources. So it comes back to this idea of how do we create walkability? How do we create neighborhoods where I love living in Grant Beach because we have a grocery store just up the street. We have the Supermercado on Grant that has an amazing, I love street tacos are my favorite food. If anyone's listening and you want to bring me street tacos or you want to meet
Me
with
too.
me,
Yeah,
that's
me
where
too.
we're meeting, somewhere for street tacos. They have an amazing little restaurant that's there and the little grocery store there. We have access to Commercial Street. risk your life and cross Chestnut Expressway, but once you get across Chestnut Expressway, we've got amazing bike paths to get to downtown. And so it is really walkable. There can be events that are going on at Drury and, access to city events. It is actually a really walkable neighborhood. It's now creating those common paths, the awareness of it, some traffic improvements to allow for safe, access to some of those areas. So the walkability aspect of how do we intentionally go back to that 1950s concept of I don't want to get in my car and drive everywhere. How do we get back to some corner stores, some restaurants?
Yeah.
But then importantly, we have to commit to support them. If we want them in our neighborhood, you've got to commit to use them. And so it's, again, this idea of we can't stay isolated if we really want to be a part of the conversation of what creates healthy, happy place. I'm really excited for your generation, for my kids, and what they want. And now it's just getting those who are powerful enough to step up and say, all right, I'm going gray now. All y'all gray people, step aside, or not even step aside, mentor me and help me fast track so that I don't make a bunch of mistakes. And how do we do this better?
Yeah, I definitely like the idea of a more friendly neighborhood. I think what has been done in Pickwick, for example, where there's a micro ecosystem where, you're a block or two away from Tie and Timber or, the bike shop that's their Howler Bike Shop. Or, there's a lot of potential for that, I think, in Springfield, especially in Grant Beach as well. I mean, if some of the sidewalks would get, a little bit fixed up, I think that there's a lot of potential for walkability there as well. And so I'm really excited to see those kind of take shape. And, there's nothing like going back to Pickwick. I was there on Halloween this past year, and the energy that you feel in that neighborhood.
Chaos and energy.
Yes. I mean, there's just nothing like it, and it's a beautiful thing, really.
It really is.
It's awesome to see. So,
I think sometimes shaping your community and shaping the places you live can require you to be a little combative with your local government.
Right.
There's a bush at the end of the road that I live on, and I used to have to call Springfield once a month to get it trimmed, and I would call them repeatedly until they would trim it, and now I don't ever have to call anymore. It's just trimmed every time that I look.
Yeah, there's an app for that. P.S. If you, the city's gonna be like, oh, Amy. There is an app that you can go in and the city wants us to use it because they can't patrol every corner, every crack in the sidewalk, right? I mean, we're talking about such an expansive infrastructure. So there is an app that you can go in, it geo-tracks where you are, you pinpoint the problem to where it's everything from sidewalk. So I reported a sidewalk recently because it is dangerous, to issues with, a house, a dangerous issue with a house. So their department is really based on complaints, which sounds wrong, like I'm complaining, but they rely on citizens to let them know, hey, here's an area of concern. So use the app, let the city know the areas that we need. Zion has joined the Grant Beach area, so super excited to have him as a neighbor.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
And but if 2 or 3 of us are making that same report and we're out walking and we're engaging, it's, again, the city's going to see that there is demand, and when you have that demand, when you have the person who's complaining about the bush that's creating a side issue for transportation, they know that people care, they know that people are, watching, and we can help collectively as that community create some improved areas.
Sure.
And go ahead.
No, you go.
I did also want to just quickly touch on a point that you made regarding, having these, like the local grocery store down the street. It really does take support of the community, and I think that that's one thing that maybe isn't discussed as much because, you can develop the ecosystem, but you have to have people supporting that ecosystem, right?
Yes.
And so for our viewers, I just wanted to make that point and drive it home because, like I said, you can have everything ready for you, but you have to use it, you have to support it for it to stay there. Otherwise, businesses leave, organizations leave if they're not being supported.
Yeah.
So.
And it's, it's easy to Amazon something
Exactly.
versus walking down to commercial and, spending probably a little bit more for something that was handmade, local made. But so there is that intention. Buy one less coffee, or go to Big Mama's and
Right.
buy a local coffee, and shop those streets. It does become really important that it's a conscious choice of, can I find this locally done versus can I stay shut away, depressed in my house, because we do know that social isolation, it does increase depression. So can I stay shelled up in my house, unengaged, buying everything that's delivered to my door, wondering why I'm not mentally well? It is a conscious choice to go out and do that, be active, be engaged. And so you have to choose. And you have to then be intentional with those choices in order to help others know about it. I didn't realize that people don't know that the Supermercado has a restaurant. One of my neighbors, I just was like, oh, take your daughter there. And he's like, oh, I thought they have amazing street tacos.
I think that one of the things that is a little concerning for people with shopping locally is that they're concerned that it's going to be more expensive. And to kind of anecdotally share a story, I went to the Filipino market on Campbell recently and discovered that a lot of their supplies, I bought a steamer, and some of the other stuff that they had there was a lot cheaper than what you find at Walmart or Target or a lot of the big box stores. So shopping locally can have, a lot of benefits for your wallet as well. That's what you're concerned about.
Also, we have individuals that are becoming, especially again, keep throwing out like your age as if you're the only ones who care about the environment. But we have individuals who are really looking at and evaluating their footprint, right? What is my life effect on my neighbors? What am I leaving for my children, my grandchildren? And so, again, that idea of walkability, the idea of consuming locally has more than just an effect on, can I save $2 and get it on Amazon? That has a massive effect on, what it means globally and environmentally. And so it's way more than just, oh, it's going to cost me $2 more to get it locally, right? That has a lasting kind of domino effect of what it means for that to be delivered to my door. And so there's that part too, right? Of being intentional on how much does your presence and the choices you make have effect on others. And not everyone cares about that. And so again, you asked me in the very beginning why I am the way that I am. I live in a life of abundance, and I live a life aware that other people, right, my life has effect on other people, and the amount that I consume and the amount of space that I take up has an effect on someone else. And so you have to choose to be aware, and you have to choose to care. And luckily I was raised in a way it's not even a choice. I just don't know how to do it any other way. So I'm very thankful my parents chose for me to be socially aware. I live a very full, very happy life because I get to live from the place of abundance and the place of creating community with others.
And then, so moving on, I did also want to touch on, for our audience that may not be in Springfield, but may be feeling the effects of this legislative session. As we know, there's been a lot of discussion on funding, and especially maybe with even public education. I know that there's been a lot of issues with nonprofits maybe not receiving as much funding this year. So I did want to ask, how do you think that that's going to impact Drew Lewis Foundation specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a hard one to answer. For sure, we ended up with, obviously, ARPA funds and a surplus, and so last year we ended up having probably more funding, more opportunity that allowed us kind of to launch a lot of things. And then to see this year, which we knew when we looked at what that surplus meant for budget, and that it was a temporary surplus. Unfortunately, a lot of policy was made as if that surplus was going to be ongoing.
Right.
And so a lot of the tax cuts that were made while the COVID funds were coming in are going to have a long effect. When those cuts were being made, a lot of reference was made to look at what happened in Kansas, and we've made the similar cuts that have occurred over the last decade in Kansas, and they continue to have concerns with budget. They're continually cutting because those funds are continually cut, and so this is going to be a long-term problem if we don't have some reverse in legislation. And who does that affect? First, everyone's like, oh, but those tax dollars that are cut, they're going to like trickle down and somehow affect me, the average consumer. Absolutely not. Like, we know that is not the case. Those corporate cuts stay with those corporate leaders, and we don't see those affecting the average individual. And so it's going to be somewhat destructive, especially in the nonprofit world where many of us do rely on either funds that are coming in from the state or different contracts like that, where we've already been told, there isn't funds, those funds are going to be cut, and even if we're getting cuts at the Department of Education, to me, it's tragic that we would cut the Department of Education, where that is our future, that is our foundation, and to not be investing in our children and using that as a political ploy is, to me, one of the sickest methods of manipulation. And those are our kids. Like, that is what 20 years from now, they're going to be the generation that's in education, then they're going to be the generation that's running, and if we don't invest in them, our future as a state is going to be challenging. So it's been somewhat discouraging to see that the way some of the cuts are made, the fact that many of the cuts were made based on money that is not going to be here in the future. I think we're going to have some difficulty with balancing some budgets, and we're going to see some of those cuts that will have long-lasting effect.
Sure. And, just from the time that we've been sitting here, I think that you've kind of identified yourself as a very optimistic person. And when we're looking towards the future, as much of our conversation today has been, I think it can be really daunting and intimidating, and at some points really depressing. You have a message of hope to paint for some of the younger people that might be listening?
I am so glad that through this interview you have said that I seem optimistic, because my birthday was last month, and one of my gifts was actually a bottle of wine that's called The Pessimist.
Awesome.
I don't know if that was a message from the gifter, but no, I think I balance those two well, where I look at what's happening and I look for areas of opportunity. So the message, right? I just watched a message about a woman who was talking about making choices. And we always have this idea of I can make choice A or I can make B, C, whatever. And how do I make that choice? And how do I know it's going to be the right choice? And what if I make the wrong choice? And the whole conversation was the act of making the choice. Because you chose A and A didn't work out for you, that doesn't mean that if you had chosen B, that B would have worked out for you. So instead, you make the choice, you own the choice, and then guess what? If that choice isn't great, you have the opportunity to make another choice. And to me, what I realize I say often to people is, well, that was a learning opportunity. Not everything at the Fairbanks has gone perfect. I've made tons of mistakes. I've learned along the way. I've made some really great decisions. But I own those decisions, whether they went the right way or the wrong way, as a learning opportunity. I've gained amazing value from my failures because I learned in that process of not only what not to do, but where are all the strengths that I have in my social network in order to pull from, in order to learn from it, create new. Some of the failures have been some of the best launching moments for new growth, new opportunity. So for individuals that are feeling that there is no hope, I mean, you are the hope, right? You are the person who can make a choice, own the choice, and realize, good or bad, however you want to define that, it's all of them are learning opportunities, and all of them create value for you to take the next step. So I don't know, if you're feeling like you can't move forward and you want someone to make the step for you, one of my favorite moments as a college faculty was I had a freshman who came in and we were choosing her second semester of classes. And she's like, I just can't choose. They're all so similar. Which schedule do I take of, the self-populated schedule? Jokingly, I was like, you could just do any, mini, miny, mo, because whatever choice you pick is going to be about the same. And kid you not, any, mini, miny, mo. And we get to and you are, she says, not it. So we get to do it again, because instead of saying you are it and selecting one, she had a couple options. So we did any, mini, miny, mo to choose her future. And you know what? The semester was fine. And she did great. And so, you know, if you can't make a decision, flip a coin, any, mini, miny, mo it, and own it, and make the best out of it. Learn from it and take the next one.
And so wrapping up, I'd like to ask you, as we've asked our previous guests, what is one thing you'd like to be remembered for with your work regarding Springfield or Drew Lewis, or mentor, educator? There's so many things.
Yeah, so I think the timing that you've asked me that, the first thing that came to my mind is in the culture that we have right now related with women. My mom, Betty Parnell, these amazing women in my life who were in their 70s and 80s, who fought so hard for women to have rights and choice, have seen some of those choices stripped away, and they never thought in their lifetime that there would be a regression in women's rights, women's voices, women's choices. And so I am my mother's daughter. Today is her birthday. I get emotional. She's an amazing human being. I want to be known as someone as amazing as she is, a female who has a voice, is willing to use it, is willing to step up for others who don't necessarily feel empowered to tell their story. And I want to be a mover and a shaker. Todd Parnell called me a doer, and at first I thought it was an insult. As like a, like the worker bee who, is in the trenches. And I realized what a powerful thing that he gifted me in that conversation when I finally understood what he meant by that. And the idea of when I see something that needs to be done, I'm going to make a choice. I'm going to do it. So if anyone, if whatever, there's some plaque about me, it should just simply say like, Amy Blansit, like the doer.
Well, that's beautiful. I can say from personal experience with working with you, it's been an absolute pleasure. You are a mover, you are a shaker, you are a doer, and I definitely think you will be remembered for that. Honestly, you've done a lot for me, and you've done a lot for the city, and so I think we will all be very appreciative of everything that continues to come from you. So
thank you.
Springfield's lucky to have you.
Yes,
thank you both.
Absolutely. So thank you for coming on the show. This has been Municipal Matters. I'm Zion Stevens.
And I'm Cam Jackson.
And thank you for listening.